It takes a few seconds, so I'll switch this one on. And we'll just say, if Mummy talks.
Alex? 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 Hello, you.
This is a miracle rescue, that all 13 members of the soccer team are out of the cave.
He turns into a superhero set on feeding as many homeless people as possible.
This election, we've seen historic voter turnout.
An all-Asian cast, there's nothing more empowering.
Oh! You have to go right up into it? Yeah!
It'll be alright.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let the music play!
New dance in the outfield. Will you marry me?
You're Laurel too? I was saying the word Yanni.
And however difficult life may seem, while there's life, there is hope.
Kids have the dream, they just want to know that someone cares.
We got love for you. It's only right. We got to stay together.
The Washington Capitals are champions!
Welcome to the show, Chloe Kim.
I love you so much. Los amo. Gracias. They just proposed together.
Life is good. The world is filled with people doing the best they can, you know, who love their kids and would like to live their lives with a little dignity and hope, just like everybody else.
Hey guys, it's Greg with Apple Explained, and today we're going to explore how Apple and Google became rivals. Because if you can believe it, the two companies were actually close partners at one point. Now this topic was the first place winner of last week's voting poll, and if you didn't get to vote, make sure you're subscribed. That way the voting polls will show up right in your mobile activity feed, and you can let me know which video you'd like to see next. So if you've shopped for a smartphone recently, you probably had the choice between buying an iPhone or an Android device like the Google Pixel. And you could probably guess that the companies behind those devices, Apple and Google, are fierce competitors in a number of areas. But that hasn't always been the case, because before the smartphone wars, Apple and Google were very close business partners. Actually, the book In the Plex, written by Steve Levy, claimed there was so much overlap that it was almost as if Apple and Google were a single company. Because in 2001, when Google was still a 3-year-old startup, its co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin approached Steve Jobs and actually asked him to become Google's CEO. But of course, Jobs already had his hands full with Apple and Pixar, so Page and Brin decided to appoint Eric Schmidt, one of Google's directors, to the position of CEO instead. But Steve Jobs did offer to serve as a mentor to Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and this began a very close relationship between Apple and Google. Jobs even persuaded Bill Campbell, who served on Apple's board of directors, to coach the leadership team at Google, including Eric Schmidt, in order to help them succeed. Now you may wonder why Jobs was so willing to help out a company that would eventually be competing with Apple, but that didn't even appear to be a possibility in those days. Because back then, Google was in the search business and already had their share of competition, including Yahoo and Ask Jeeves. So it actually made sense for Apple and Google to team up, especially considering they both shared the mission of limiting Microsoft's domination of the personal computer industry and preventing them from taking over online services and mobile devices. So since there was no direct competitive overlap, Apple and Google could benefit from the other's products and services. And a good portion of the growth Google achieved during this period can be attributed to the fact that they had so much support from Steve Jobs and Apple. So things were going smoothly until the development of the iPhone in 2004. Now keep in mind that while Apple is a secretive company, they have to share some inside information with certain parties who collaborate with Apple on a product. And remember that Google Maps and YouTube, which is owned by Google, were both offered as native stock apps on the original iPhone. So Apple had to have given Google a fair amount of information on the iPhone during its development. And that insider knowledge may have prompted Google to secretly acquire a smartphone OS company called Android Incorporated in 2005. 2 years before the iPhone was public knowledge. And in 2006, Eric Schmidt actually joined Apple's board of directors, so he was likely getting even more insider information than before. Now, when the iPhone was revealed to the public in January 2007, Google CEO Eric Schmidt appeared on stage during the iPhone's introduction to talk about the areas of collaboration between Google and Apple. Schmidt even jokingly suggested merging the two companies. So obviously there was virtually no animosity between Apple and Google during that time. But things changed 11 months later when Google released their prototype Android operating system that borrowed many touchscreen inventions from the iPhone. And when Steve Jobs found out, he took it as a personal attack. And when you consider the close history of collaboration between the two companies, it's easy to understand why Jobs was so upset. He had essentially been betrayed by the two young guys he was mentoring, and the trust between Apple and Google had been violated. And this led to Jobs famously saying, "I will spend every penny of Apple's $400 billion in the bank to right this wrong. I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen product. I'm willing to go thermonuclear war on this." Another reason why Jobs may have become so emotional over Android is because he saw this type of situation play out before with Windows. Remember when Steve Jobs led the development of the Macintosh, which featured an operating system founded upon a graphical user interface? Well, Microsoft was collaborating with Apple during the Macintosh's development, and Bill Gates wondered why Apple wasn't planning on licensing the Macintosh operating system to other hardware companies. So Gates essentially had Microsoft recreate a version of the Macintosh OS called Windows and had it ready for licensing just 1 year after the Mac was revealed. This situation with Microsoft was almost exactly what happened with Google, and Jobs wanted to make sure he did everything in his power to prevent this story from playing out again. Because Windows went on to capture over 90% of the personal computer market, destroying any momentum Apple had generated with the Macintosh. And that was something Jobs did not want to see happen to the iPhone. So as Google's plan for Android began to take shape, executives from both Apple and Google began communicating about each other's concerns. And a recurring issue for Steve Jobs was that Google was blatantly stealing features from the iPhone. But Google executives claimed that Android's features weren't anything new, as the concepts had already existed in the industry long before the iPhone. But during one of their in-person meetings, things got especially intense. In 2008 on Google's campus, Jobs warned Google executives that if they released a version of the iPhone's multi-touch capability for Android, Apple would sue. And it appeared that Google did bear in mind Jobs' threat, at least during the early days of Android development, because some of the first versions of Android didn't feature any multi-touch capabilities, although this could be attributed to the fact that the phones likely weren't powerful enough to handle such a feature. But lack of power was an issue time eventually solved, and as Android devices became more capable, they began borrowing more features from the iPhone in addition to adding features the iPhone didn't even have. Not to mention the design of new phones like the Motorola Droid were more appealing than ever before. And this worried Apple, causing tensions between Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt to reach an all-time high. Because remember, Schmidt was still serving on Apple's board of directors at this time. But not for long. In 2009, he stepped down from the position due to regulatory concerns and because Apple just wanted him as far from their company as possible. And when Steve Jobs announced Schmidt's departure from the board, he pointed out that Google was planning on developing a computer operating system, so it didn't make sense to keep Schmidt around as he began competing in more of Apple's core businesses. Now, once Schmidt's ties to Apple were completely severed, the battle between these two companies started to heat up. First came the battle over a mobile advertising company called AdMob, who specialized in running ads inside smartphone apps. Apple appeared to be close to sealing the deal with AdMob after making a bid of $600 million, but because the deal took longer than 45 days to complete, Google had the opportunity to acquire AdMob, and they offered $750 million, a deal the startup couldn't refuse. This angered Jobs, who said Google may have violated antitrust law, but the Federal Trade Commission found no legal issues with the acquisition. But Apple quickly responded by acquiring a similar mobile ad startup called Quattro Wireless for about $300 million. Now this eventually led to the creation of iAd, but not much was mentioned about the service after its launch in 2010, and iAd was eventually discontinued in 2016 for unknown reasons. But the real drama didn't begin until Google released their Nexus 1 flagship phone in January 2010. Not only did it feature design elements from the iPhone like a single home button, but it received a software update 1 month after its release that included multi-touch, which violated Steve Jobs' standard of what Android was allowed to do. This prompted the emotions between Apple and Google to reach new heights, with one Apple employee saying, "I've never seen anything quite like it in my life. I'm in so many meetings where so many pot shots are taken. It feels weird." But over at Google, feelings toward Apple weren't so bad, which isn't surprising considering the iPhone helped boost the popularity of Google's mobile services and ads. Now these feelings of ill will eventually led Apple to ditching Google Maps on the iPhone in favor of their own Maps app, and allowing other search engines like Bing and Yahoo to serve as the iPhone's search engine in Safari. But this year, Google will reportedly pay Apple $9 billion in order to remain Safari's default search engine, so it looks like that isn't going to change anytime soon. Now, I think the future of these two companies will look similar to the relationship between Apple and Microsoft. Yes, there were hurt feelings and animosity in the past, but as each company enjoys success in their own areas, time will likely mend any wounds. And who knows, maybe Apple and Google will work on some type of project together in the future. It certainly wouldn't be the first time, as Apple has worked closely with both Microsoft and IBM despite troubled relationships with them in the past. So that is how Apple and Google became rivals, and if you want to vote for the next video topic, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.